In business today, three things to know. First, a moment of silence in Ottawa as the Canadian Parliament goes back to work. We'll have the latest on how Washington is reacting. Then, Caterpillar crushes earnings, and General Motors does better than expected. An earnings wrap is coming up. And have degree looking for work. Why today's college grads are having trouble finding a job. Are they looking in the right places? Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. We'll wrap up the day's developments following the shooting in Ottawa in a moment. But first, the markets regained positive territory for the year on Thursday. The Dow initially surging more than 300 points before paring those gains after hearing a healthcare worker is being tested in New York for Ebola. He's suffering Ebola symptoms, including a fever and a stomach ache. So it's either Ebola or he had too many Gray's Papaya hot dogs. We're not entirely sure. Industries and airlines did lead the way thanks to a strong performance by Caterpillar and General Motors. So let's take a look at the final numbers. The Dow closed up 216 points to 16,677. It should be noted that the Dow was well above 300 points. We'll talk about that in a moment. The S&P 500 up better than 1%, and the NASDAQ up better than 1.5%. A notable miss, however, this afternoon from Amazon. Amazon fell short on earnings and revenue for the quarter. The company says revenue came in at $20.58 billion. That's $300 million lighter than expected. And the loss came in at 95 cents a share. Analysts expected a 74-cent loss. General Motors beat revenue estimates on strong sales in China and North America. GM earned $1.4 billion, or 81 cents a share in the quarter. That's a little bit less profit than expected, but a lot of that was due to one-time charges. And Caterpillar's third quarter earnings blew past expectations. Earnings per share rose almost 20% above estimates, and strong earnings numbers also coming out from the airline industry today. American Airlines reported revenue just shy of expectations, however, beat predicted EPS. United Airlines posted record profit in its third quarter, more than doubling profits from the same quarter last year. And Southwest Airlines, quarterly profits up 27%, earnings 55 cents a share. A lot of that largely due to the drop in oil prices, of course. Taking a look at commodities, gold down 12 points. Oil still trading below $82 a barrel at $81.94. Other economic news, the U.S. Labor Department reporting the number of claims for jobless benefits rose last week by 17,000 to a seasonally adjusted 283,000, but remain near 14-year lows. Brian Jacobsen is the chief portfolio strategist with Wells Fargo Funds Management, and he joins us from Milwaukee by phone. Brian, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Thanks for having me back.
Boy, how fickle are the markets? Because I just want to first talk about how the market sold off by more than 100 points because somebody who may have been in West Africa went to Bellevue Hospital in New York with possible symptoms of Ebola or the flu or the common cold. Yeah, it's really just, is it just that the markets are that sensitive and that they get so concerned on this hype?
Well, I think that a lot of it is just markets in general are a little jittery. They tend to move one way or the other, and when everybody's moving on the same side, it's kind of like if you've ever been on a boat, and if everybody moves one direction, it's going to tend to tip it, and that's what's been happening with some of the big headlines that have been hitting. But I think the important thing is to notice just how big of a bounce we have had from the October 16 lows. We're up pretty significantly, about over 5% here, and it's been a nice ride, but a lot of people, they were scared by some of the volatility, and so they sold on the way down and haven't gotten back in yet.
Yeah, you say that it's fundamentals to the rescue. Can you explain?
Yeah, I think that's really the key message here is a lot of the sell-off. Yes, I think that some of the concerns about Ebola and the such were complicit in driving the markets lower, but most of it was driven by fears of the fundamentals coming out of Germany when we saw the industrial production numbers that were published last week for August being much worse than people were expecting. But then suddenly earnings season sort of trudged along, and we kept seeing earnings surprising to the upside. And so the fundamentals were really to the rescue for this market, where if you focus on that, I would not be surprised if we end this year at closer to 2,100 on the S&P 500 than to even 1,900.
Well, that's a pretty strong call. Is it this a case for investors that when the market moves lower on sort of this one-off news, whether it be Ebola or some other sort of headlines, that they should look closer at the fundamentals and not just sell with everybody else?
I think that it really is always prudent to sort of make your own independent decision. Don't really pay attention to the herd. Really the key thing with investing is know when to follow the herd and know when to fade the herd. And that's always the tricky thing. And if you focus on the fundamentals, I think that it's going to keep you informed as to when to begin to fade the herd. And that's why I'm really not all that concerned. As long as we keep seeing earnings keep marching higher, and most importantly, I think the revenue numbers also continuing to improve, we should see this market continue to march higher.
I want to ask you about that. 2 points regarding earnings. One, we're starting to finally see top-line revenues grow, not just bottom line, which means they're not sort of cutting their way to better earnings. But the second is how much sort of financial engineering is going on, because we've heard a lot about company buyback of stocks, and of course that tends to inflate earnings.
Yeah, the buybacks, let's deal with that one first, because it's something that's actually been going on for since the 1990s, really, as far as just corporate America generating a lot of cash. And instead of reinvesting in the business, they've effectively been buying back shares to reinvest in the business per share. So if you think about it in those terms, it's not that bad of a situation if you're a shareholder. However, that's not really the path to economic prosperity to continue to have these share buybacks, though it does serve as a bit of a fiscal stimulus, if you will, to put a little bit more money in the pockets of shareholders. That does percolate its way throughout the economy. But we are seeing businesses beginning to do some of the capital investment that we really do want to see them really continue to do to propel the economy and not just the market forward. Now, as far as what the issue, as far as looking at the cutting to the bone with we're actually seeing the top-line revenue growth, that I think is actually going to begin to accelerate as we see the Eurozone move from almost being in a recession, some areas are, into actually growing a little bit faster. I think the baton for economic growth is being passed a little bit from the U.S. economy to the Eurozone economy as the banks go from dragging on growth to contributing to growth.
Well, that's interesting, Brian. So we'll wrap it up. You think that despite some of the news coming out of Europe, we're going to start seeing some improvement there?
That's what the key is to look forward, not necessarily to look backwards with the markets here. We know that there's a lot of weakness, but that's why the markets were up pretty decently. Some of the PMIs, the purchasing manager indices, were pointing to stronger growth. And when the banks clear the asset quality review that the ECB is set to release the results of, I think you're going to...
And we're going to talk about that in a moment.
Actually turn positive.
Yeah, and Brian, a little later in the show, we're going to talk about the stress test with the banks. Brian Jacobsen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Canadian ministers returned to Parliament today, a day after a lone gunman stormed the Capitol in Ottawa. Our Washington Bureau Chief James Blue is here in New York to bring us up to date on the investigation and Washington's reaction. James, first, what can you tell us about the suspect?
Well, basically, he was a loner who was a convert to Islam. It looks as though he was really inspired by the materials from ISIS. He'd been living in a homeless shelter in Ottawa, and it turns out, yes, they have determined that he was a lone gunman, but in the last few weeks, he was trying to hire and rent a car with 2 other homeless men for some purpose. They don't really know what yet, but it's very clear that all of sort of the hysteria over ISIS and the Islamic threat have really come home to roost in Canada.
And so is there evidence that he is part of a larger network, or simply that all of this information sort of spurred him on as a lone wolf?
There are some suspected links with one of Canada's leading terrorists. His passport had been removed, and the Canadians are really relying on the United States, specifically the FBI, to really sort of drill down on what the specific connection between this known terrorist in Canada is between that guy and this suspect.
Over the past 15 years or so, we have seen a few Canadian nationals possibly enter the United States for terrorism actions. So the question is how is the U.S. helping the Canadians?
Well, the U.S. is helping the Canadians, and largely to try to get to the bottom of, is this a single shooter, a single guy, or is this a plot? But the real challenge is, generally when these things happen, there's an attempt to try to lock the border. The big concern to business is that if we lock the border, or if the U.S. locks the border, that it will impinge trade, and that will affect both countries. Canada is the largest U.S. trading partner, and that's a concern.
And it's the largest open border in the world, I think, isn't it?
It is. And so you probably recall when there have been these past incidents of Canadian nationals coming into the U.S. for the threat of terror, that the lockdown was pretty severe, and it did cause backups for miles and miles along the border, and causing pain for businesses on both sides. So the hope is that they can contain it and do something wise that won't affect trade.
We've heard all these concerns about the southern border and Mexico and terrorists, but we're starting to see a tension back on the northern border. What has been Washington's reaction following what has gone on as far as terrorist alerts here?
Well, Washington has really tried to downplay and to really sort of suggest they think it's a single person. They think that the goal in terms of investigation is to try to determine to what extent was this individual tied to some larger network. Does that network have links in the U.S.? And if so, how and would be the best way to pursue them?
Okay, James Blow, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, European banks take the stress test. How did they do? You're watching Rise Exchange.
There is a reason Africa is called the new frontier. What was once potential is now an opportunity ready to be seized. Once revered for our resources, today's wealth lies in our people. People who build the cities that shape the future. People who know an idea in one place means business in another. A generation for whom technology means there are no borders, no boundaries. We are the new lions in a brave new world, kings of the urban jungle. And there's a bank that puts the world in our pocket and the future in our hands. UBA, Africa's global bank.
Last week on Rise Exchange, it's back in session for the Supreme Court. And already the court made a historic non-decision.
I really think this is more an example of that judicial modesty.
Criminal masterminds were allegedly going over plans to make crystal meth. One of them butt-dialed 911 for talking about their plans to make illegal drugs without even putting the lock on their phone. Donna and Jason Noe are our favorite people of the day. Watch this week for more. A Rise Exchange. Welcome back to Rise Exchange. Just like here in the U.S., European banks undergo something known as a stress test. Those are simulated economic crises that could cause weak banks to collapse. And word is they didn't do so well. Ivan Eland from the Independent Institute joins us now on the phone with what this could mean for Europe and the global economy moving forward. Ivan, thank you for joining us here on Exchange once again. Just give us a little bit of an overview of exactly what is a stress test for a bank.
Well, they look at the health of the bank, and this precedes the European Central Bank taking over in early November. So they're getting ready for this, this change in the European Union. So they give the banks, they look at their health, balance sheet, that sort of thing. And several of the banks have been rumored to face these problems, although a lot of the banks seem to be denying, they seem to be saying more optimistic things than what is being leaked out. So, of course, these reports are not final until they hit on Sunday. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're being distributed to the banks today. But if there are some banks that are still unhealthy, it's very difficult. It's sort of as they say, this is a global thing when banks are successful, but when they fail, it's a national thing because you still have compartmentalized banking in various countries rather than a European-wide banking system, which is one of the problems of the of the banking system.
Yeah, and of course these stress tests have come out since the 2007 financial crisis when many banks failed. The question is, can they survive? So basically, what is the practical impact then? They're talking about 11 European banks failing the stress test. What are the practical impacts then for the banks and the financial industry at large?
Well, there's more than 100 banks that have had the stress test, so that's only a small number. Also, I think that we don't know the results from those 11 for sure yet, whether they've actually failed. The other problem that we have is that governments really overreact to any bank failing, and I think the overreaction is likely to be worse than the actual problem, simply because the governments rightly or wrongly regard banks as the circulatory system of their economies, and so they're willing to subsidize, bail out any bank that fails. And of course, that's what we have in the United States as well now. And so, banks can fail, and the economy can go on.
Sure.
Banks are just like any other business, and in the capitalist system, they really need to fail if they're not doing well, right by the customers, et cetera. But I think the banking system the bankers have had a cushy system because they're a very strong lobbying group.
Right, and a lot of protection to keep them from failing. Is there some controversy here? Because if they're not shored up under these stress tests, they have to keep more money on reserves. And then there's some issues as to whether they can do their job for consumers and businesses by lending money.
Well, I think this idea that that would slow down the economy. The economy probably does need to slow down. I mean, Europe still has a lot of dead weight and regulations, excessive government, et cetera, and certainly in the banking sector. And if there are failed banks and they need to have more capital on hand because they're in shaky shape, then that's what they need to do. And it's if the economy is not, if the credit is not flowing from them into the economy, I think the Europeans are just going to have to accept some economic pain on that.
Is there a chance here that even though we're talking about these 11 banks possibly failing the stress test, that when these results are in fact released this weekend, those results may be a little bit different?
Well, yeah. I mean, they said they had a preliminary review with each of the banks, and the banks were all saying, well, we think we're in good shape after this preliminary review with the ECB, so we're going to have to see what the results really are, because of course, the ECB is, I think, to some extent captive of the banks as well.
Okay. Ivan Eland from the Independent Institute. As always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Time now for our business ticker. Stories making headlines across the nation and the world. Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen is stepping up to fight Ebola. Allen says he will donate $100 million to battle the disease, which has so far killed almost 5,000 people, mostly in Western Africa. The billionaire has also created a website, tackleebola.com, to help raise more money. Some of Allen's $100 million will go to the University of Massachusetts Medical School to fund the training of medical workers. The world's second largest retailer, Tesco, announcing its chairman, Richard Broadbent, is leaving the company after admitting to major accounting errors. The company says it overstated profits from February to August by $423 million. That's $23 million more than Tesco admitted to in September. So what will November bring? Tesco has not yet named a replacement. The tax man cometh, as always, and this time for the internet. At least that's the plan in Hungary. Hungary's economy minister unveiled a plan to tax internet usage. The government will see 62 cents for each gigabyte of data consumed. And diamonds are forever, but these diamonds are especially for Halloween. This year's most expensive Halloween costume is made of 70,000 diamonds. Call it a trick or treat, but you'll have to shell out $1.6 million to buy one. The makers admit it's a bit heavy and might not even be that scary, but it's definitely the blingiest costume on the market. Ahead, our favorite person of the day went to great lengths to avoid prosecution. You're watching Arise Exchange.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, as always.
always an issue, and the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
The best part of the day for me is when Arise America goes on the air. It's the opportunity for me to tell the stories that I've learned about all day long, and also to talk to some of the smartest, most experienced experts on any number of news topics and explain not just what's happening, but what it means to us. That's the one thing that's great about Arise America. We don't just tell the news, we also seek to understand why it matters.
One of the great things about Arise News, it is truly a multicultural global channel that is paying attention to communities of all different kinds, not just here in the United States, not just in Africa, but all around the world. As we're giving a voice to the people that don't traditionally have the kind of a voice that a mass media organization can have. You're getting here at Arise News that you're not going to find at the other networks is a unique perspective, and I think that's part of what Arise is here to do.
Arise serves underserved communities by bringing them news, information, sports, and entertainment from places that are becoming part of the world economy, that are becoming a part of the world voice, and decisions that are affecting things in the world that people care about. They care about the economy. They care about safety and security. And if you come to Arise and you watch our broadcast, these are the things we're going to bring to you every day, 24 hours a day.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reasons. Here's a lesson for all you people who have considered faking being in a coma to avoid court appearances. Don't be caught using your supermarket loyalty card. British prosecutors say Alan Knight stole more than $64,000 from a bank account of an elderly neighbor who suffered from Alzheimer's. When police began investigating Knight, he claimed to be a quadriplegic who sometimes fell into a coma. He even went as far as to check himself into a hospital to avoid court appearances, claiming he was having seizures. None of it was true. Alas, Knight appears to have been undone by the supermarket loyalty card he used to get discounts on food and produce. Police were able to track the use of the card and then obtain surveillance video of him walking and driving, not so much in a coma. Finally, Knight appeared in court. There he is in a neck brace and wheelchair to face fraud charges. When prosecutors showed the video, however, he quickly dropped the act and pled guilty to fraud, forgery, and theft, and probably bad taste as well. He will be sentenced next month. And so Alan Knight is our favorite person of the day. Coming up, with diploma in hand, college grads look great, but fail to find jobs. You're watching Arise Exchange.
If I was building my own news network, first thing I think I'd want high-quality reporters, very educated, intelligent people.
Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime.
I'm Julian Phillips.
I'm Wendy Gillette.
I'm Sophia Songhai.
I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. Thank you for joining us here in New York City.
I would like to see more people of color represented in high positions in media.
We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well.
People need to understand the problems that are going on in the community are much closer than we actually think they are.
Kayla Phillips is one of the shoppers who is suing Barney's, and she is here with her attorney. What is it that you want from them?
Not to judge every African-American person that comes in your store.
Global. It's Monday, so it must be time for a new round of sanctions against Russia. Nigeria is open for business, and you are getting a handle on this situation. Compelling. Time for liquid lunch, things that make us want to drink. Could she have been separated at birth from, say, Grimace? All business.
Money's coming out of these countries, and that flow is part of what's driving the equity markets.
Entertaining money daily.
It's about reimagining.
Arise Exchange. Welcome back to Arise Exchange. The debate continues on whether a college degree is worth it. Get this, nearly half of all college grads cannot find a job that requires a degree 2 years after graduating. Andy Lockwood is founder and president of collegeplanningGuru.com and the author of How to Pay Wholesale for College, and joins us to talk about what has to be a disturbing statistic historically. Is 2 years a very long time to wait for a job?
Look, there's all sorts of pressures that college graduates are under right now, and I think they're at historic highs. You've got an ever-increasing amount of debt. The average student graduates with $33,000 worth of debt. You've got all sorts of other things like defaults are on the rise. I think 1 out of 10 loans are in default. And it's just hard to get jobs, period, for anyone, whether you're a college grad or not.
Well, the pipeline of jobs is also more challenging because older Americans are staying in the jobs longer, I imagine, and that has sort of kind of clogged the pipeline a little bit.
Yeah, to some extent, of course, but you've also got a situation where, I think 46% of college graduates cannot find a job in the field that requires a college degree within 2 years.
Yeah, here's the bottom line. Are colleges doing the job that we're hiring colleges to do?
If you look at college the way I do, as its mission is to help kids not with 4 years, but the next 40 years of their lives, I think it's very questionable at best that they are doing a good job.
And why is that? Have we changed the focus for what people should be learning to basically areas of academia that are not being fruitful for getting a job?
I think it's very easy to go through college and learn nothing. So there's something called well, kids are studying less than they ever did before. Kids average an hour a day of studying in college. And there's something called the Collegiate Learning Assessment Test, which tests how well kids learn how to think critically. Critical thinking is the #1 skill that employers say they want from their
What does that mean, critical thinking?
It means the ability to deal with ambiguity, to be able to improvise. So, for example, if you're doing a math problem or you're filling in a yes or no bubble, it's either right or wrong. You get out in the real world, there could be 5 correct answers.
The European system is different. I was talking to somebody, for example, in Australia, about how they look at universities. People go to school almost vocationally. They want to be an architect, for example. They make that plan in high school. Should we be moving more towards that system instead of people going to college and you say, what do you want to do with your life? And you're like, I don't know.
Well, that actually is something I'm very obsessed with in my practice, and I thought it was a real deficiency. So we actually hired a career counselor because of that. Because the issue is that if you change your major 3 times and you take an extra 2 years to get out, you are paying an extra, I don't know, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 per year in tuition, and you lose the opportunity of working in those 2 years. So that's another $40,000, $50,000. That's $200,000. I think colleges and high schools could do a lot better job at preventing that $200,000 problem.
Okay, so you are a college grad, or you're getting close to being a college grad. What should you do to focus yourself and your resume to focus on what an employer wants to see?
Okay. They want critical thinking skills. Some majors are great for critical thinking skills. Some are terrible. So examples of great majors: engineering, hard sciences like biology and chemistry and all that. Also, surprisingly to a lot of people, philosophy, literature, history.
I wrote a book called, based on, I love the book, The Tao of Pooh. So that could be an example of critical thinking.
Sure,
there was a time that was criticized.
Okay. I would never criticize you for that. And then here are some really bad majors. The soft sciences like psychology and sociology, teaching, sadly, and the most popular major is also one of the worst majors for critical thinking, business. So those are majors actually to stay away with counterintuitively if you want a career in business.
Well, because business is very numbers and accounting oriented, and maybe not so much critical thinking, but by the numbers.
I think there's a lot of grade inflation, and there's a lot of easy classes, and not a lot of critical thinking skills that are taught. So on one hand, you should learn critical thinking. On the other hand, you need to get internships, and you need to talk to the career center and ask them certain questions.
Should you also be showing that you are in fact working during college, if possible? Is that important or not so important anymore?
The interning is very important.
Interning in your field.
Yeah, in a field you're exploring. So I think before you choose a college, I think you need to walk into the career center and say, listen, I'm interested in studying this. What happened to the people last year who studied this? Who recruits? What companies or what corporations show up to recruit? Who did the best? Who majored in architecture last year? How did they? Who got the best job interviews, and how do I get those interviews?
With 20 seconds left, should we take away the stigma of people who shouldn't be going to college but still can be successful in doing something?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
There's a stigma for that. And
as a college planner, it's ironic, I think, but I don't think everyone should go to college. And we see all sorts of examples of people who never went to college who have made millions and had a lot of success in other areas.
Andy Lockwood, author of How to Pay Wholesale for College. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Tomorrow on the Rise Exchange, long considered the drink of choice for celebrations, we will look at the business of the champagne market. Let's take a look at the final numbers once again. The nice comeback there for the markets over the last few days. The Dow finishing up better than 200 points. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching.